And finally, in this video, we are going to take a look at the home page.
Alrighty.
So far, we have a products entry system, we have a news entry system, and we have our display pages set up for both products and news.
You're right.
Now we need to take a look at the final piece of the puzzle, and that is the home page. You can see that the home page displays products and displays news.
Right.
So we want these tied into our database records to keep everything up to date. Now, we went in and we added all of our products. Actually, let me go back one. Okay. On our admin screen, you can see we added all of the products and all of the news into the database.
Right.
So we have all these entries. Once again, this was a very simple matter of going in and looking at the old site and copying the entries out into our own form.
Right, into the submit form.
Right, we did that off screen just because that way you wouldn't have to watch the tedious process of going record by record.
Yeah, and time constraints, so.
So we have our items entered into the database. So now we're all set to get some real information put up on the homepage.
Okay.
So let's get started. We'll go into Go Live, and we'll load in the current index page. As a matter of fact, right off the start, I'm actually going to rename index because the idea here is that we're going to create a dynamic version for the home page, an index.php. And we don't want the web server getting confused between our two index pages, meaning it's going to be looking for a specific index page.
Okay.
I'm actually going to rename our current index.html to _index.
Okay.
This way, this will keep it separate from when we have a dynamic home page.
Okay. So
let's load this in, and immediately do a save as on it, and we will call this index.php. So here's our PHP page. Let's tackle the products section first.
Alrighty.
So let's highlight to give ourselves an idea of where this appears in source, and that is this section. You can see that each quick display of the product is represented by a cell. Now we can go in and delete the last two cells, because instead of having all the HTML there, we're actually going to have a loop, much like in previous lessons. So we need to have PHP tags around this section of the HTML. So we'll get these put into place. And proper PHP tag. There we go. And we will be running queries, and therefore we will need our database include. So back up to the top of the script, and we will say include includes /db.php once again. So there we go. And now this gives us the ability to run our query. So it is going to go like such. $query equals select. Let's see. All we need here really is the for the products would be the title and the short description. We don't even need the long description at all.
Right.
So we could say title. So select title, comma, short description from products, and we want to say where active equals 1. Now we need to specify more than just let me catch that.
Yeah.
Like such.
Yeah, that'll come back to haunt you.
Yep, and it most certainly would. Alright, so we definitely want to only show active products.
Okay.
But we're talking about the front page now. We don't want to show all products. If we tried to cram all 6 products across the home page.
I mean, what if you got, a whole, archive of products, Like, if you have a clothing store and you have 50 pairs of shoes and
that's just not going to work. That would destroy our front page.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we respect the featured field.
Right.
And only show featured products on the front page. So we will say where active equals 1 and featured equals 1. And finally, we will respect the display order so that we can use the display order to affect the front page as well.
Okay.
So we'll put in our order by display order, like such. And if there are any errors, it will probably tell us about them shortly when we try to run this. So let's get our result by running the query. So $query and we'll feed it our database link, like such. So now we're ready to loop. We'll begin with a while $row equals MySQL fetch associative $4 result, and closing parenthesis.
There you go.
Open up the loop and finish the loop control syntax. So we have our loop in progress. Now let's get the necessary information set up so that our information is filled in here. So we need to replace this with the title. So we have our $row key title, like such. And let's see where this has us so far. Save out our index.php page, and we'll change this over to index.php. And so far, so good.
Cool.
It looks like we may need to take out the -ed thing.
Yeah.
It's throwing this off a little bit. But we do have our custom titles per product, though, of course, this text down here is all duplicated because we haven't put in the dynamic version yet.
Right.
So with this, we know that this is known to work. So we can simply drop it into place here and change this to say, let's scroll over a bit, this is going to be the short description. And run.
And there you go. Look at that.
Now let me jump over to the admin screen for just a moment,
Right.
so that I can go to our products and remove the -ed.
It's where we were just making a test earlier.
And there we go.
All right, cool.
So it looks like we might even need to cut something out of the end of the short description just to pull all this back into place. Or you know what, to get a little bit sneaky about this, I might actually reorder this product.
Okay.
So we can go into the Douglas fir, or here's what I'm going to do. Let's take the Douglas fir cut off,
Right.
and put something else in its place.
And
So we'll feature the spruce standard.
okay. And
there we go, everything all back together. And we have just proven that our featured is working as expected. We've taken one product off so that it is no longer featured, and replaced it with a different product to be featured on the home page.
And there you go.
So this has our product section working.
All right.
That takes care of products.
Is that over and done with?
That should be it, yes.
There you go. See, sweet, painless. It was easy.
Now we need to focus our attention on the news section.
Okay.
So, back into Go Live, and back out to layout for a minute, so that we can take a look at what is going on with our news. We can see here that what I have selected basically makes up a news item for the home page. So let's jump in and take a look. We can see that we have each of these repeating sections to represent a news item. Let me drop down a little bit so that we can separate this out by itself. So we see one single news item consists of a link, and then an image below the link, followed by a new line. So that by itself should be what we need, and we can delete out the rest of it down to about one more line. Should take care of it. There. I'll delete that out, and now we are set. Let's jump down a line and put in our PHP tags. Let me see if I can move this out just a little so I can see. There, we can just barely catch the edge of that. The joys of working at a lower resolution.
Yeah.
Alright, so here is our opening tag, and our second tag, once again to allow us to close off the loop that we know we'll have to create. So, let's begin with this query. Once again, we have $query, and you know what? I'm finally going to get just a tiny bit lazy here.
Okay.
We've just done this, so I'm going to grab these two lines and paste them into place, and just save us a bit of time in typing.
There you go. And it's probably a good practice to have. If you know you're going to be typing the same thing over, just go copy it.
So what are we interested in here? Well, we are interested in, actually let's take a look and verify, the headline, and that's pretty much it. It's just a headline separated by a line. So all we need here is select headline from news. So we'll change this to news.
All right.
So where active equals 1, yep, that sounds good. Only show active items. Featured equals 1, yes. Retain our control over featured items. Now order by, we don't have a display order.
Right.
So we'll order by auto ID.
ID.
And we'll go back to ordering in descending order to match the rest of our news pages.
Of course.
So here we have our query, our result, Now it is time for a loop.
Okay.
So what we're going to do here, though, is we're going to use a for loop in this case, and all the other item display pieces of this system, we've used while loops.
Right. I was kind of curious about that for loop. Why would you want to use a for loop instead of a while loop?
In this case, let's take a look at something that's going to happen.
Okay.
Right? We have this bottom trailing line.
Right.
And we have that as part of each iteration. We always put a bottom line.
Yes.
And before we started editing this, the last news item lacked a bottom line. Basically, if we had 6 news items displayed, we would have 5 lines displayed.
Right.
We need to make some code that is able to tell when we are on the last line.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Really what it needs to be able to check is, are we on an item that comes before the last? If so, we need to put a line. If not, we need to omit the line.
Okay.
This means we will need to be able to tell where we are at in the current loop. If we use a while loop, we are going to need to create an extra variable to keep track of this information. If we use a for loop, the information is provided, because remember we have a variable. In our case, we usually use $i as an iteration counter.
Okay.
So we'll have all the information already provided, and we won't need additional variables.
Okay.
So let's put this together. We're going to create a for loop, use $i, and set it to start at 0. Then we're going to continue looping as long as $i is less than MySQL num rows for $result. And finally, at the end of each iteration, increment $i. And then our starting bracket, our ending bracket. So this should give us a list of all results. Now, if you remember back to the using the MySQL with PHP lesson, we saw that in this case, we generally used the MySQL result function each time.
Right.
Now, what if so far let's say we've gotten used to using $row, and we rather like being able to use $row.
Right.
But we're in a for loop. We don't have the $row equals that we have in a while loop. It is possible to use it. Where we had the $row equals MySQL fetch associative drive the while.
Right.
In this case, we're being driven by MySQL num rows. But nothing is stopping us from setting $row. This means we could go inside the for loop, even though it's already set up to run. We could still go ahead and specify, caps, $row to equal MySQL fetch associative on $result. This just gives us our final level of convenience where we have $row to access all elements, and also showing that this isn't limited to use in a while loop. We can use it in a for loop if we wish.
Right.
So now that we have $row, let's start putting some of this together. So let's replace this text with $row. Actually, we need our PHP tags to accomplish this. Like such. So $row, and the key is going to be headline.
Right.
Like such. And with that now, that should be able to run.
You have just saved yourself a lot of time by using that particular loop. Because if you had used the while, like you were talking about, you would have had written a whole bunch of extra code with that.
Technically, we're just getting to that, because you can see here's an example of what we were talking about. We have this trailing line, and in the news site, that calls for having one less line. We need to be able to remove this bottom line.
Right.
So all that for loop stuff is about to come into play heavily.
Right.
So let's take a look at this. We need to be able to. I'm actually going to kill off this paragraph tag.
Okay.
I believe that was an orphan paragraph tag. Let's make sure this isn't affecting our look, and it's not.
Okay.
Just cleaning a bit of HTML up.
Right.
So now we have this line starting and then ending there. We need to make a decision as to whether or not to show that line. So I'm going to start a full PHP tag, and before we get too carried away, I also want to end that off. So we have this set to there. Now, this is, of course, going to have to be put in an echo, because now we're dealing in parsed PHP. So we have our echo completed like that. And this now gives us the ability to run an if statement. So we could say something like, if some condition, echo this out. And if you remember, we don't need the we don't explicitly need the brackets here, because the way an if works is the following statement is then controlled, so we can safely omit the curly braces. So what is the condition we're testing for? We want to say that as long as we are not on the last line, show this image. And we're doing a very similar test up in the for loop. Here we're saying as long as there is a result, go ahead and print it. So we can use this as the basis for our check. Let's copy that and paste it in here. The problem is, right now if we left this alone, every iteration we are iterating because this is true. This means for all practical purposes, every time this is run, this is true.
I see.
So we will need to slightly modify this. So as long as I is less than MySQL number of rows, and we're going to add -1. What this means is, as long as we are on a row that is before the last row, because you could kind of say the number represented by this is the number of the last row. So we're saying as long as we are less than the last row, -1.
I got you.
Then do the echo. So let's run this and check it out.
Boom,
We've removed
look at that
last
cool
line. So with that now, that has our home page put together. I guess the one last thing we could check is to make sure that the featured flag is in fact being respected.
Okay.
So we could jump over to the admin section for news, and we have the harsh weather as a featured article. So we could click on that and uncheck featured. Now, if we refresh the page, we see that's taken away, and it's actually left a blank space now. We would need to feature something else to fill out the space.
Right.
But we can see.
Well, essentially, you wouldn't be pulling something off unless you're going to replace it anyway.
Right. But this is proving that our featured aspect is being respected. So we'll put that back in to put the page back together. And there we are.
Cool.
So, and we can see that since this is the index.php page, if we strip everything off, hang on. The browser was being a little bit too helpful in filling some information in. So we can see that DS3 has our index. As a matter of fact, we might need to put the main HTML as a header over to this one. But all in all, we have our index set up. Now you saw just a second ago when this wasn't parsing. This is either because we need to set up a setting within our Apache server, or simply restart the server if we get an error like that. But again, that's almost outside the scope of this VTM, as we are focusing on the PHP and MySQL aspects of our site's design. And with that, that's really going to wrap up the Stones River logging site enhancements.
Cool.
We've taken a look at how we can go in and set up our homepage so that the product section is driven from the database and respects the feature flag, and the same thing for news. So really, with that, that is going to wrap up this lesson.
Alrighty.